Good morning also from my side, and welcome to our next panel here. During the last hour, we've already heard the different aspects about digital sovereignty, and now we will take a closer look at digital sovereignty in the context of cloud and data by discussing the potentials and the strategic importance of cloud computing. Therefore, we will touch upon cloud technologies, cloud applications as enablers for digital transformation, digital innovation, cloud strategies, and sovereign cloud use in practice. And therefore, I also have, I would like to welcome my excellent panelists with whom I will discuss this. So first, I now have to switch a bit because unexpectedly Christina is next to me. So I would like to introduce Christina Kraus. She is one of the co-founders and CRO of Meshcloud and an absolute multi-cloud expert. In her function, she runs business development at Meshcloud and helps to drive cloud transformation in some of the largest enterprises in the world. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
So next to her we have, Kahan. He is the Managing Director and the Senior Cloud Advisory Executive at Accenture, and he has a profound expertise in data networks, communications, infrastructure, and IT cost reduction strategy, so it's a pleasure to have you here as well. Next to him, I would like to welcome Hanna Hennig. She is the CIO of Siemens AG. In her function, she enables the digitalization of this really global technology powerhouse, but moreover, she has gathered more than 25 years of experience in IT, so it's a pleasure to have you here as well. And last but not least, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Boris Otto. He is the chairman of the Fraunhofer ICT Group and also director of the Fraunhofer Institute for Software and System Engineering, ISST, in Dortmund. What a long title. He is an absolute expert, and his research is focused on data spaces, data sovereignty, and industrial data management. And I think what is also very interesting is that with you we have also a member of the boards of directors here of Gaia X, the International Data Space Association, and Catena X. So it's a warm welcome to you too.
Thank you.
I would like to start this round with Hanna. Siemens is a globally active company and therefore needs global access to highly performant and trusted public cloud technologies, also solutions across the globe. So I would be interested, how would you describe the usage of cloud technologies at Siemens, and what characterizes the strategy of Siemens globally?
So, I mean, one of our architecture principles, both internally as well as for our external products, is actually cloud first. So that means internally we have already outsourced most of our data centers, and we have just a single one keeping on-prem workloads, but most of the workloads are already in the managed services, and we are now moving all of our applications, which is around 9,000, into the cloud and actually make them cloud native. So it's not only an infrastructure as a service, but it's also a cloud native development service, which we will be using and applying to all our applications. That's basically the internal enterprise view. When it comes to our products, which we deliver to the market, we are now moving all of our software products. Maybe many people do not know, we are not only building hardware, but we are actually we are #1 in industrial software, and we are now moving all of our products into software as a service. So obviously we have, as you can hear, only a cloud-first strategy.
Thank you. Maybe a quick follow-up. So you're quite advanced with applying the cloud strategy in your company, but what have been the biggest obstacles you faced during this transformational process?
Well, I guess as any other large company, this year we're actually celebrating 175 years being on the market. So quite a traditional company to a certain degree, but we always reinvented ourselves. So obviously, the first steps before moving into cloud were always, the skepticism about, is it secure enough, right? And obviously, that's where I believe most of the companies have already, do that. We have identified, we are defining the data which is to be stored into the cloud, and we have different confidentiality levels, which basically then we are assessing the risk on how far these can be moved into the cloud or not. And that's the approach we are always taking. But honestly, if you ask me, we are able to really now move even confidential data into the cloud. Why? Because even though we are a technology powerhouse, our focus is not necessary to build cloud. There we have other partners who are much better in that, and they invest hell of a lot of money, which we rather invest in terms of forming the software and the use case propositions and solutions for our customers than rather building on the back end. And that's where security, from the hyperscalers and the providers, partners are much stronger than we could ever build even in our own data centers. That's our, really firm conviction.
Okay, thank you. My next question goes to Ian. Accenture has a broad overview of the challenges and opportunities that come with these cloud projects across the economy. What patterns of challenges have you identified that affect different sectors and clients? And derived from this, could you also elaborate the need coming from decision makers that they have to address to make this successful, this process?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pretty broad question, I must admit. So let me start with what are the typical challenges that we've seen. And as you might know, Accenture is an international company with a strong footprint also in North America. And it's like so many things in technology that oftentimes the US is a bit ahead of us in the technology curve. So sort of being an MD here in Central Europe, I would say I profited a lot also from the experience years ago that our colleagues in US already made. However, Europe, Germany in particular, is special when it comes, obviously, to data security, which was probably 4 or 5 years back the predominant topic whenever we would engage with our clients on use of cloud technology for multiple purposes. Is it cost saving? Is it getting, I use the term now, more agile, right? Or get faster innovation cycles implemented? And I would say 8 out of 10 cases, the first question is, but how would I be allowed to do it? I can't put my crown jewels over to somebody else, right? And I would say that has ever been partially since today the biggest dialogue to say, yes, you're right, but we need to double click on this. There is not this single one data. Obviously, in a transformation journey towards the cloud, you need to, first of all, understand pretty much your probably grown application environment, understand it, segregate the data, understand data in rest, data in transit, understand your security levels. I have certain clients, I think, Hanna, this is what you said, that have a special obligation. They have highly secure data in the telecommunication industry, storing call detail records for governments, etc. You can't easily hand them over, and that's perfectly fine. However, the message that we were passing and where we're engaging in the dialogue is that if you double-click, it is about analyzing this and finding the right strategy. What workload can be hosted where? Where does the data sit? And it's equally possible to either split the data, right, where for whatever policy you don't want or you're not allowed to put it out in a foreign country or to a foreign operator. And you need to fuse this together by, in the former times, you would have said a middleware or middle layer, or you work with encryption technologies. So there is solution for everything, but yes, it took a long while in convincing work. Now, let me continue a couple of sentences. What is the cloud actually, right? And I mean, people when talking about cloud mostly refer to public cloud, okay? But cloud is well beyond a pure technology layer, right? Infrastructure. It is a consumption model. It is a model for consuming innovation, yeah? And it is also a sourcing model. Yeah? And I think that is the important aspect to understand, and that's the freedom that cloud gives us, that we can consume on arbitrary level of depth from an infrastructure to a pure service on top of this, and it's all about sort of assembling effective ecosystem and having a coherent application or even service strategy to project on the cloud services.
I have one quick follow-up, because you mentioned, I think, in my opinion, two interesting things. You said that some are a bit afraid of how they can manage to create that kind of cloud, to implement that cloud strategy due to compliance reasons. And then you also mentioned that cloud can actually also help to be very innovative. What would be, like, if you have just, like, if you have to use one sentence, what would be like your convincing sentence to convince even smaller companies to make that transformation a process?
My sentence would be: consuming cloud service on any of those levels delivers you thousands of man-years of innovation that you never could achieve on your own.
Okay, thank you. Christina, now I will turn to you. I mentioned it before, you are our multi-cloud expert here. So when I look at the major challenges in the context of user-side cloud strategy, that you always have to consider also the governance, the cloud governance, and I hope you can still hear me, because okay, perfect. So most users use cloud offerings and technologies from different public cloud providers, which is, as I said, described as this multi-cloud approach. I would be curious to hear more about your experience with these kind of projects. And I think it's also worth maybe to share some of your experience with regards to what is actually needed to have that successful and sustainable cloud strategy and cloud governance. Why is it so important to have such a thing?
Yeah, thank you. So when we think about governance, one important part is having the cloud strategy in place. And Hanna mentioned that cloud strategy is more than just saying, okay, I'm going to go to the cloud, or choosing one provider, or choosing multiple providers. It's also to decide why you actually want to go to the cloud. So she mentioned they want to kind of modernize their applications. They want to be cloud native and be customer focused, offer SaaS offerings. And you have to have this in mind when building your governance. So this cloud strategy has to be clear, and has also has to be communicated clearly throughout the organization, because when you think about governance, you need to adopt your governance approach basically to your cloud strategy to make it work. And one thing I would always recommend to people that are starting off their journey and that are on their way to move to the cloud is to also speak to others that are a bit further along, to share the experiences and learn from the experiences that other people have done. Because I see one challenge that is often underestimated. I mean, everyone talks about it, complexity, of course, especially in a multi-cloud approach. But how does it actually feel? Like, how does it affect your organization, your processes? And I think if you talk to people who have gone through that journey, you can get a lot of insights on how you tackle this in advance, or how you can prepare for the complexity that is upcoming. Because we have the one side, the cloud is shiny, fancy, you can do a lot of things, and that's true, but how do you prepare for the long term, for the day two operations, for managing cloud really at scale for really large organizations? And that can really be a challenge. And then the last thing that I believe is very important when it comes to governance is to not build the governance for the governance sake, but for the users. So if we think about cloud, it's for developers and engineers to build applications, to be innovative and build digital business models. So we have to make our governance approaches support this objective. So the governance has to be consumable. It shouldn't be blocking people from getting into the cloud, but supporting people for getting there faster and easier, while securing actually the whole infrastructure and staying in control of it.
Do you have maybe a favorite example how you can actually also make that more understandable, what a multi-cloud does and why it is so beneficial? Like with the governance strategy in place?
I mean, for the multi-cloud, it's really, everyone loves to choose, right? If you have a large organization, you have a lot of use cases, and for the different use cases, you will need different types of infrastructure. And developers are really hard to find at the moment, and if you give them the technologies that they love, it's going to make you as an employer more attractive. It's going to make the work of the developers and engineers much easier. And then when it comes to governance, to give you an idea of what I mean by making it consumable and user-friendly, it's basically, you can always ask yourself the question, how long does it take a developer in your organization to actually get access to the cloud? That's a really quick process, and there are organizations out there where this may take like 9 months until they go through the whole process labyrinth, basically. They need to navigate until they get access to the cloud, and that shouldn't be the case.
Boris, now I come to you. I think I'm very happy to have you here as well, because you have at a +1 also the regulative perspective, where you can share your experience with. And now I would be interested in what is your perspective on these strategic questions that we have to tackle when we talk about cloud strategies and digital transformation.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thanks for the question. And actually, I'd like to touch upon the title of our panel, strategic importance, right, of cloud. So, of course, there are, let's say, well, technical enablers that cloud computing brings about, like scalability or the ability to massively make available computing and storage capabilities. But I think the most important thing is that cloud, and you asked it that earlier on, what is it in one sentence, is basically the pathway to business innovation. Because if we look in many new scenarios, and you mentioned a couple of those, like mobility data space or Catena X, it usually comes down to the point that companies need to come together and share data. Because no one of those ecosystem partners usually has all the data resources needed to create such innovation. I'll give you an example from the Catena X context. As you know, Catena X is, let's say, the data space for the automotive industry, let's call it like that. And there are a number of requirements, both from a business but also from a compliance perspective. Let's take the Supply Chain Act, for example, where you as an OEM, as a car manufacturer, have to make sure that there is no child labor along your supply chain. And when we then know that, let's say, only 25% of the value creation happens at the OEM side, but the rest is, let's say, in the production network, and by the way, Volkswagen has more than 20,000 suppliers, it is totally clear that no single player in this network can provide all the data necessary to comply with the Supply Chain Act. So we need to team up. And we have the same thing also in the mobility data space, where different providers of mobility services need to team up. And the question now is, where should that happen? I mean, if we want to share data, how do we do that? I mean, this will not be enabled by a system that sits behind your firewall, right? It will be cloud native, as Hanna also said. So it must happen in the cloud, in the middle of the ecosystem as such. And that brings me also to another point that Christina also touched upon, because how does, let's say, the cloud landscape will look like in the future, very much likely? I mean, it will not be dominated by individual partners, but it will be diverse, which is a great thing. There will be a number of large cloud platform providers, but a way bigger number of smaller edge service providers, which we need to bring together in order to enable interoperability of cloud services, in order to make sure that people have a choice, and also, of course, in order to make sure that data is portable from one data space to the other. So therefore, I think it's very important that we understand cloud transformation as also an enabler of business innovation. And on the other hand, and that was nicely framed by Hanna, cloud first, it's basically, well, the way to go, both for ecosystem use cases, but also internally. And therefore, it's of strategic nature, of course.
One quick follow-up, because you mentioned that we should team up to actually make use of the full potential of it. When I think of teaming up, I would say trust is also an essential element. How can we ensure that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and you know, I mean, when we talk about cloud computing and also data spaces, there is much talk going on about, let's say, the true European values in the data economy. And I was always also struggling with myself, so what is it really, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, I think it really goes down to the voice of the individual. So, as Christina said, the individual provider of data, the individual user of cloud services has a choice. And it's upon his or her control to determine what happens to the data resources that he or she shares. And in order to not only be able to articulate these requirements, policies, if we talk about, let's say, sharing on cloud environments, but also being able to execute control and enforce it to a certain extent, what we need is policy management in the cloud. So technology that allows us to attach, so to say, terms and conditions, what should happen with the data once it's shared, but also make sure that this is, let's say, traceable. So are these other guys, the third parties that use my data, are they really sticking to my policies or not? And also, to an even larger extent, technologies, as I said, policy enforcement in the cloud to make sure that it's actually executed. And I think that is something that creates a continuum of trust, so there will be different trust levels, and these trust levels should be derived from the criticality and the value or the significance of your data for your business.
Thank you. Hanna, and my next question goes to you. I think it's interesting because we talked about the cloud strategy, how it's actually a good thing, that we can be really innovative. I also like that we never narrowed it down to a specific continent, for example, or to a specific market, so that we think always beyond the borders. What I'm now interested in is what role does Siemens play in the ecosystems of Gaia X and Catena X? Because they clearly address also some issues we have, like the issue also with trust. So what role does Siemens these there?
So I mean, obviously we are engaged in both programs. From the Catena X program, we are, both time from a supplier perspective, because we are supplying, these solutions also to the customers who are engaged in these programs as well. With Catena X, we are very much closely teaming up, in particular around, obviously, factory use cases, because that's our core business. We are looking, in particular, also around sustainability and CO2 reduction, where we are, on the one hand, using the data space work, which also is done on Fraunhofer, and we have recently just created an organization which is called Estenium, which allows suppliers to actually exchange their data, however decentrally, via ledger technology, which allows to track CO2 footprints of each material component of a product, which then, when you exchange that, you provide that information back to the customer so that they can also satisfy, for example, the taxonomy requirements coming from the Green Deal from Europe. So that's the one thing. Coming back to and Gaia X basically equivalent to that to a certain degree. We are not engaging basically in building a cloud or whatever, because again we keep it with the partners. What we, however, do, and we created, and I just talked about it yesterday because I was at the cyber security conference with the Hasso-Plattner Institute, which is taking place also today. And there I was talking about the Charter of Trust, which is an organization which we created in 2018 with other companies, which is exactly about defining the security requirements for a secure exchange of data, built in also security requirements into our processes, industrial processes, and in our industrial products. So trust also comes with a standardization layer, which you basically get as many partners on board as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Christina, I would be curious how you actually follow this initiative of Catena X and Gaia X, and now also to turn the discussion a bit in a direction that I think is also interesting, because the political side always uses that kind of buzzword, digital sovereignty. So maybe if you can link it also to that, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. I think what both initiatives have shown or have done in the past is that they really have raised the awareness on the importance of digital sovereignty across Europe. So everyone is aware that this is an important factor when implementing a cloud strategy, when implementing an IT and a digitization strategy as a whole. So that's one of the great things that have happened in the past. I think we are not actively involved in the projects, but obviously we also work and have the vision of creating more sovereignty for our customers that use multi-cloud. And multi-cloud as such is already one of the aspects that people can do in order to be less dependent on an individual provider. And before you mentioned cloud is mostly related or put in relation to the public cloud providers, but that's not true. If I look at our customers, we have a lot of customers that actually still have data centers and that run large private cloud infrastructures as well. And I think having this capability to change and to choose is very important when it comes to digital sovereignty, because one thing is clear, we cannot, being sovereign doesn't mean that I do everything myself. So we need to focus on what we do best, and we need to be able to adapt to changes that come from externally. And I think that's what we can contribute to this discussion, to really help organizations to be able to manage different cloud providers and to facilitate the integration of new cloud providers. And also, what I think is important and is often a bit neglected in the discussion is technologically there are already a lot of ways to move between different cloud providers. And one thing that we have to take care of is also the organizational perspective. So really, you mentioned agile before, but really how fast can we adapt to new situations, and how can we make our organizations more flexible, even if they are large and have grown into what they are over a long period in the past.
Okay. Ian, you have gained so much experience throughout all the projects you had, and I would be now curious how you actually assess the whole discussion around digital sovereignty, and what impact do you think it could have on business?
Yeah, I think recent times have taught us a hard lesson that we can't take things for granted that we thought we can. So I think the whole topic of sovereignty and digital sovereignty, I think has rapidly become paramount for literally all the businesses, right? I want to create a link back to the question you posed to Christina on the ambitions of the Gaia X project. And Accenture, as a company, we sign up 100% behind the declared goals of Gaia X. By the way, also obviously behind Catena X. On Gaia X, we are not founding, we are day one member. I think Catena X, our application, is currently in processing. So we fully stand behind it. It is a set for all of our clients, be it in automotive, in industrial, in automotive suppliers. This is really a key topic for them, and it is our business to support our clients, even support them in the work they bring into the definition bodies. Yeah, and so also from a business perspective, this is important for us. Now, there is one sort of slide, and now speaking as a personal, I can't claim now to bring an official Accenture position, but I think where we need to be watch out very careful is that if we compare the exercises or the standardization to achieve data sovereignty, right? The duration the Gaia X project is running, right? The size, the discussions, we have country organizations. And now let's lean back top down and read the AWS blog. How many features they've delivered since 2009. I mean, this is amazing. So I think we need to strike here the right balance between trying to get things really right until all the I's are dotted and the T's are striked, yeah, and speed. And this is all what I said earlier, what the cloud paradigm is about, right? And this is, for me, quite interesting to observe, right? How do we actually bridge the gap between the speed that the cloud development and the innovation on the market is providing, right? And our sovereignty standardization endeavor that is just taking time, right? And I think that will ultimately be one, not the only critical success factors. I see a parallel if we tune back a good 6 years. There were the first sovereign cloud offerings in the German market. And don't panic, I don't name anybody, right? But they were not exactly a success. They weren't. And why wasn't it? It was because the market decides. It is not the providers who decide what's good for the market. And the market, if in doubt, would choose along availability, feature parity, price point, yeah, and what do actually my developers want. So I think the race is open. We fully stand behind it, and I'm a curious observer.
Yeah, Boris, you had the word you wanted to react.
Yeah, I think what I would like to second on what Ian just said, because I mean, I think it would not be wise if Gaia was to, let's say, be a better cloud service provider than AWS or Microsoft or something. So Gaia X is making a wise decision to reducing its scope to the max, if I may call it like that. So really concentrating on those kind of services that are needed in order to achieve interoperability and sharing within the cloud, overall cloud landscape. Saying that basically means that we have, if it goes down to the ultimate core in Gaia, there are two services. One is the registry of Gaia X conformant or compliant services, and the other thing is the compliance checking service. And that is something that comes, let's say, from the user, because the user and the market want to be in control over their data assets in the cloud landscape. And saying that, I think this is a wise decision to really, as I said, reduce the scope to the max. The second thing that I would like to stress is, and I would also share my personal opinion with you on that, I was extremely happy to see that the non-European partners were aboard in Gaia. Because as you said, Ian, we should not pretend to be the better cloud service providers, but we should, let's say, get them on board in order to make sure that they, together with us, design this standard that then holds true for all of us, and then basically embrace it. And what I can share with you is also the fact that they take it very serious. They do not send their marketing guys, but they really send their lead standards and platform architects to help us make a, let's say, a standard that comes from the user perspective. And I think that is something that is the right direction to move forward.
From a consumer perspective, you know, being basically also on the consuming side, as being a supplier, but consuming hyperscaler sources, is exactly as Christina said. We are pretty much looking, on the one hand, as a consumer, to really be agnostic to the hyperscalers via having, you know, tools which allow us to switch from one to the other. And also when we are building our own products, which we are selling to the market, we build products which are, again, hyperscaler agnostic. Yeah. So the customer can define which cloud hyperscaler they would like to use, or if they want to go on-prem. I think that's the key.
I think it's a really good message. We are running out of time, but I will be a cheeky person now because I'm interested in, I have many questions left, but maybe we can answer that briefly, maybe in one sentence, because I would be interested where you will see the industry standing in 2025 or 2030, maybe in one sentence, and then we close.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah,
where will the industry stand on these questions on like cloud strategy, cloud transformation in 2025 and 2030?
Everyone? Or? So what I would love to see by then is, first of all, to have a European provider in the market and a more diversified market, and second of all, to also have for example, public sector companies that are looking into cloud right now to really do the step and be a lighthouse within Europe as well, to not let only the companies go first and test out what works and what doesn't, but to really be, have the signaling function for the market to also encourage smaller companies that do not have the resources to move to the cloud confidently.
Okay, next.
I think we will see consumption of cloud services skyrocketing, going through the roof. And based on this, we will see a whole new wave of innovation, startups, new companies, new services, fueling the Industry .X ambition. I think we're just on the beginning of an E-curve.
Okay, Hanna.
So my forecast and wish is that we don't even talk about cloud. It's part of our DNA.
Okay.
It goes into the same direction. My vision would also be that no one really talks about any longer about data sovereignty in the cloud. Why? Because it's implemented so widely and it's simply there.
Okay, that's a great ending, I would say. So thank you very much for this insightful discussion. It was a pleasure, and applause, please. Yeah.